Hello, this is Little Green Ghouls, and welcome back to Goosebumps Revisited, a series where I break down a classic Goosebumps book and any episode that goes along with it. I will also be totaling up some of our Goosebumps cliches and classic moments. This week, I'm excited to visit Monster Blood. This was another one of my childhood favorites. I was all about the idea of slime monsters that could grow and eat anything in their path. I'm pretty sure I'm still into it because the 80s version of the Blob is one of my low-key favorites. I know there are 3 sequels to Monster Blood, but I couldn't tell you what they involved at all. Despite loving the concept of Monster Blood, even the plot points in the original were a little hazy for me, both in the book and the episode. But anyways, let's jump into our cover. We're back to our Jacobus covers, where we will remain until Be Careful What You Wish For. I think some may argue that this cover is kind of boring, but I really like it. I think the glasses sinking into the Monster Blood right away let you know we're dealing with like a Blob-esque monster here. The 2008 version tries to spice it up by giving the Monster Blood some more facial features, which I really don't like, but maybe that was an attempt to give the Monster Blood some more oomph in case you're not into blob monsters like I am. I have to give credit for referencing the trash can scene though, from the book where it's at its most sentient. The 2003 version is just the original, with a bright slime border, so nothing too exciting there. Our front tagline says, "It's a Monster Blood drive." This tag is kind of odd to say the least. It's not creepy and it's not really even a joke. It's kind of like a really bad pun, but barely that even. The back tag says, "Blood, blood, everywhere." And I think I'm supposed to go with, "and not a drop to drink." Again, I don't really get what this tag was going for. As far as merchandise, the early 90s continues to be a great time to be a kid, with Goosebumps folders, and more excitingly, Monster Blood makeup, and even Monster Blood blood capsules. I don't know what makes these more than just green versions of blood, but I support their existence regardless. Before we jump into my beat-by-beat summary, let's look at the blurb on the back. While staying with his weird Aunt Catherine, Evan visits a funky old toy store and buys a dusty can of Monster Blood. It's fun to play with at first, and Evan's dog Trigger likes it so much he eats some. But then Evan knows something weird about the green slimy stuff. It seems to be growing, and growing, and growing. All that growing has given the Monster Blood a monstrous appetite. Alright, now that we're done with that, on to the summary. The book begins with our protagonist Evan Ross getting dropped off at his great Aunt Catherine's house while his parents leave for a family emergency in Atlanta. Stein wastes no time, and by page 1 we have our trademarked character description. Evan is thin, 12 years old, and is our first little ginger with curly orange hair. We also establish right away that Evan is a bit feisty, constantly rolling his eyes, crossing his arms, and giving exasperated or sarcastic replies in defiance of his mom. At one point, she suggests he ties his shoes so he doesn't trip and break his neck, to which he responds, "I like 'em untied," and questions if anyone has ever really tripped over untied laces. I like that Evan has some sass to him at least. His mom tries to appease him by changing the subject, but Evan is not having it, stating, "You're gonna leave me here for weeks with that horrible old woman?" It turns out he's actually never met this horrible old woman, but something tells me he might be on the right track. We also meet Evan's Cocker Spaniel Trigger, who is also 12, and we establish this family emergency involves a future move, so this makes the 3rd Goosebumps family in a row that have relocation as a part of their story. As the mom beats on the door, Evan reminds her that Aunt Catherine is totally deaf. Evan might need to broaden his horizons though, because he's not very understanding about this, nor will he be throughout the story. He wonders to himself, how am I going to spend 2 weeks with a strange old lady who can't even hear me? He gets this from his father though, who describes Aunt Catherine as stubborn because she's been deaf for 20 years and refused to learn sign language or to lip read. Yeah, because those things are just so easy to pick up. Also, sign language won't get you very far if your family isn't willing to learn it along with you. Like she'd be signing at them and they'd have no understanding. But yeah, shame on her for not learning these things after going suddenly deaf at the age of 60. We learn through Evan's earlier eavesdropping that Aunt Catherine took care of the dad when he was a boy, but the dad has no loyalty here. We also establish that literally everybody else they know is on vacation since it's August, so it has to be Aunt Catherine. Also, this family's emergency is literally just the dad getting transferred to Atlanta for work, so that's not very exciting. I was thinking there'd be more to it given all the hype they gave us. We see where Evan gets his sarcasm from, because when Mr. Ross gets logic cornered by Mrs. Ross, he reverts to a classic, "Well, excuse me." Great rebuttal there, Dad. Aunt Catherine is a bit weird, but perfectly harmless. By page 5, Stein has effectively gotten me ready to meet Aunt Catherine. We finally get to meet Catherine in a chapter cliffhanger, after she yanks open the door while holding a bloody knife. But it's not human blood, of course, it's just cow. Evan describes her as a large woman, very robust, broad-shouldered and tall, with startling black hair and at least 80 years old. She also wears no makeup and has large, round, steely blue eyes. Catherine describes Evan as big, unlike his father, who she called Chicken, because he was small like a chicken. I think I'm getting the sense that there might be some history between Mr. Ross and Aunt Catherine. Evan is confused and reflects on the fact that he's actually not that big, and that his dad even calls him skinny as a spaghetti noodle. Body shaming is big in this family. Catherine's voice is described as deep as a man's, and she spoke clearly, without the indistinct pronunciation that some deaf people have. Catherine talks at them and tells them not to bother responding because she can't hear them anyways. I like Aunt Catherine's style. Aunt Catherine becomes uncomfortably fixated on whether Evan likes girls or not, repeating 4 different variations of "he likes girls" on one page. Mind your business, Kathy. Her breath is described as sour, and Evan tells his mom Aunt Catherine's breath smells like triggers right in front of her since she can't hear. Evan is kind of a little shit, but I like him. Catherine describes herself as a scary old witch, and I'm kind of starting to agree with her because she jokes about or possibly threatens putting the dog into a pie repeatedly. The mom ignores the tension and decides this is the right time to leave and pieces out, leaving Evan with this very stable old woman. We get to see Evan's room for the summer, and it's described as smelling like mothballs multiple times. And then I kind of realized, I've heard that descriptor so many times in a book, but I have no idea what mothballs smell like. I've gleaned it's not pleasant. Evan suddenly realizes the true horror of this story. Aunt Catherine doesn't own a Nintendo, computer, or even a TV. Evan's room is full of science books like biology, astronomy, ancient Egypt, chemistry, medical texts, and even some old dusty yellowed books, but Evan glumly concludes that there's nothing for him to read. Evan, expand your mind. Or at least look at the pictures. Evan continues his snooping, and when he opens the closet door, suddenly something leaps out on him, and everything goes black as he screams. As you can probably tell, this is a chapter cliffhanger, and wouldn't you know it, we get a cat scare. I was secretly hoping for another squirrel attack, and stay out of the basement. This cat is aggressive though, I'll give him that, since he literally describes having to peel it off his face as it screeched. Aunt Catherine happens to be standing right there suddenly, and lets us know that Sarah Beth, which is a great name for a cat by the way, is pure evil. It's also becoming apparent that Aunt Catherine loves to repeat herself, because she continues to say that the cat is evil, evil, evil. Trigger decides to attack the cat, and we're treated to a page-long animal fight before we get them separated. Suddenly, Aunt Catherine sternly says, "We have to take care of the dog." And because she likes to repeat herself so much, she says 3 different variations of that as they walk down the hall. Evan, for some reason, is taking this in a very dark direction, so we get another chapter cliffhanger, where Evan implies that maybe she's going to kill the dog. Trigger, of course, is just being led outside to the fenced dog run that was described earlier, so cliffhanger, drama, extinguished. Evan is not happy about this though, because despite his rugged name, Trigger is a house dog, and will not take kindly to the outdoor lifestyle. Evan realizes he can't even argue with Aunt Catherine because, since she won't learn sign language and won't learn to lip read, it means she gets to do whatever she wants and no one can tell her no. Again, I like Aunt Catherine's system she's got going on here. I also enjoy the way Stein describes Aunt Catherine's speaking style. "Come to the house, Evan. I have milk and cookies. You'll enjoy them." Her words were kind, but her voice was hard and cold. She kind of reminds me of the grandma from Malcolm in the Middle, or I guess any old lady Cloris Leachman plays. After gobbling down some cookies, Evan informs Aunt Catherine through charades that he's going to take Trigger for a walk around the neighborhood. Evan doesn't see any kids his age, but he does get to witness a middle-aged man in orange swim trunks washing his car. Trigger continues our trend of poorly trained Goosebumps dogs and breaks free from Evan's grasp to chase after a squirrel. The squirrel immediately escapes up a tree, but since Trigger's eyesight isn't what it used to be, he keeps chasing the now imagined squirrel down the road. Evan finally gets a hold of Trigger when suddenly a hand grabs him on the shoulder in our 4th consecutive chapter cliffhanger, with a voice demanding, "Hey, who are you?" It ends up being a girl close to Evan's age, whose intention of grabbing his shoulder was to scare him, so mission accomplished, I guess. Andrea, who prefers to go by Andy, is described as 12, pretty, with short wavy brown hair, flashing brown eyes, and a playful teasing smile. She seems like she'll take on a role of resident fashionista, because she's described as wearing an oversized yellow t-shirt, black spandex leggings, and bright yellow Nikes. Andy is a real charmer, saying, "I like your dog. He looks real stupid. I like stupid dogs." Evan agrees and tells her his name is Trigger, which she says, "Yeah, that's pretty stupid, especially for a Cocker Spaniel." Andy bonds with the dog by stating that her name is stupid too, because she thinks Andrea sounds too stuck up, and that she should be wearing a corduroy jumper with a prim white blouse and walking a toy poodle. Andy is a good old-fashioned 90s tomboy. Evan goes to say his name too, but she clamps a hot hand over his mouth, because she wants to guess it. This might just be a me thing, but I find that really gross. I don't know where your nasty-ass hand has been. She then says, "Let me guess, it's a stupid name too?" This girl has a complex about names. They decide to walk into town a few blocks away to check out a toy store since Andy needs to buy a present for her cousin's birthday. I grew up in the middle of nowhere, so I'm always fascinated by kids who could just walk places. I could walk to cows, and that's about it. On the way, they banter back and forth, and she continues to call him stupid, which he enjoys for some reason. We finally reach Wagner's Novelties and Sundries. I'm full grown, and in case you're like me and didn't know what sundries means, it's this. You're welcome. I'm an educational channel now. They explore the store, which is full of old, dusty boxes and random toys scattered throughout. At one point, Evan finds an old lunchbox with Hopalong Cassidy on it, which Andy replies, "A cowboy with a stupid name." I'm telling you, this girl has an issue with names. She wonders if her cousin would like it, cause he likes stupid names too. Great. It's a family-wide complex. Trigger leads Evan into a small back room, where he picks up a blue soup-sized can of Monster Blood. surprising miracle substance. The store owner appears and is pissed because Evan's back in the storage room where he's not supposed to be, and informs him that the monster blood is not for sale. After some back and forth, the old man is like, whatever, take it. It's probably old and no good anyways. Andy really wants the monster blood and keeps trying to buy it from Evan. Evan understandably points out that she's clearly not used to getting her way, which she says, I'm an only child. What can I sell you? I'm spoiled. I'm always here for some only child slander. Andy is not letting this go and suggests that they share it. Evan decides to let her play with it over at his aunt's house, so they head back. Evan walks in on Aunt Catherine engaged in a verbal argument with her cat and thinks nothing of it. She examines the can of monster blood and tells him to be careful. The cat spies on the kids while they hang out in Evan's room. Andy immediately realizes that the old yellowed books are magic books and is excited to look through them. Evan remains ever the anti-intellectual and says, thrills and chills, because he's too cool for books. Andy makes a joke about Aunt Catherine turning him into a newt, and Evan doesn't even know what that is. So Evan, maybe it wouldn't hurt you to crack open a book every once in a while and learn something. They examine the can of monster blood, looking for instructions, because we all know how complicated slime and Play-Doh can get. The can finally pops open, and inside we get our first look at the monster blood, which is bright green and shimmered like Jell-O. They poke it, and it's cold, thicker than Jell-O, heavier. They stick it in the closet and find that it also glows in the dark. Evan is disappointed because he had high hopes for this monster blood, and says it's just like any other stuff he's already had, like alien stuff or yucky glop. Evan is a slime connoisseur. He would have loved the slime craze back in 2016. They proceed to do all the usual slime activities, squeezing it, bouncing it, stretching it, and throughout all this, Evan remains unimpressed and disappointed. I don't know what this boy is hoping for from his canned slime. Its most unique feature so far appears to be that it stays cold even after you've handled it for a bit. After noticing that it leaves stains on the floorboards, they responsibly take it out back to play in the yard with it. Trigger is thrilled to see them again, and Evan channels his inner old man, telling the dog, take it easy, old fella. They play catch, but Evan overthrows right to Trigger, who proceeds to eat half of the monster blood. Angie reveals herself to be a fairly shitty person, because her first response is, oh no, now there's not enough left for us to share. While Evan has the proper response and wonders if his old dog is going to get sick. We then cut to 3 days later, and I guess we've settled the mystery. Monster blood is not poisonous. That was a short cliffhanger. Evan decides to use a notepad to interact with Aunt Catherine, and asks if she'll be making pie mentioned when he first arrived. She tells him no, and Evan goes on to rant to himself at how mean and horrible this old witch is. I guess he really wanted that pie. Evan notices an old bone pendant around Catherine's neck, and she notices him noticing, so she sends him outside to play with his girlfriend. The whole, is that your girlfriend? Is seriously one of the most annoying things adults do to kids for some reason, so I get why he's over her shit. Evan reflects on some bad news he got earlier from his parents, which is of course that they're having trouble finding a house, so he's gonna have to stay longer. We also stop and examine his current outfit, which is a red Gap t-shirt and denim cutoffs, in case you were curious. Outside, Evan is suddenly accosted by a pair of teenage twins who are described as big beefy guys with short blonde hair and round red faces. They're wearing baggy shorts with black heavy metal t-shirts, high top sneakers without laces. So I guess they won't have to worry about tripping. They begin hassling him and they won't let him pass the road without paying a toll. We have a chapter cliffhanger where Evan thinks he's about to get a beatdown, but Andy appears and she takes the beatdown instead. The twins, Rick and Tony, steal Andy's bike and knock her to the ground. She smacks her head on the pavement and she scrapes her knee as the two bullies take off with the bike. These are some proper 90s bullies. I foresee asshole victims in the future. Andy heads back home to clean her wounds, and Evan heads back to his room to mope. He opens the can of monster blood and notices that it's almost full, and tells himself, Trigger must not have eaten that much after all. This inspires him to go check on Trigger in the backyard, where we have our first proper scary cliffhanger, because he discovers Trigger's eyes were bulging, his mouth was wide open, his tongue was flailing rapidly from side to side, white spittle running down his chin onto the ground. The dog was gasping hoarsely, each breath a desperate, difficult struggle. He's choking, Evan realized. Trigger's eyes rolled back, and the dog's legs collapsed under him, his stomach heaving and the air filled with his loud, hideous gasps. This would have freaked me out as a kid. Pets are off limits, Stein. You already murdered Petey off screen, now you're upping the ante with an on-screen full-page death sequence? Evan manages to get Trigger's collar off, which allows him to breathe again. Evan then spends some time pondering how this leather collar could have shrank, when he realizes Trigger looks bigger. He's confused because Trigger definitely is too old for a growth spurt, so he concludes it must just be his eyes. This place is making me see things. This doesn't seem like the kind of thing you just want to dismiss and ignore, but that doesn't stop Evan from doing just that. The next morning, Evan comes across Andy, who's busy trying to free a cat that's been tied to a tree trunk by the Beimer twins. These twins need their asses beat. I hope the monster blood dissolves them. They free the cat and head back to Evan's house, where they find Aunt Catherine doing a puzzle. Evan mocks the idea of the puzzle, despite puzzles being awesome. Evan spends some time exploiting her disability by shouting things at his deaf aunt like, "You're a crazy old coot." Andy is not impressed with this behavior, and they head into his room, where they find that the monster blood has grown up to the brim of its can. The monster blood definitely grows at a slower rate than I remember, but that honestly makes for a better story. They play with it for a bit and right away notice that it's weirdly warm, and that it no longer bounces, instead it splats right onto the floor. Andy also notices that Sarah Beth the cat is watching the monster blood closely and remarks how intelligent the cat looks. Evan dismisses this as looking as stupid as every other cat. These kids really are into the word stupid, and they end up sticking the monster blood into an empty coffee can. The monster blood fills half the coffee can, and after some debate over who should eat it, they settle on a messy, hilarious monster blood battle until dinner time. I definitely would have tried a nibble of the monster blood. I'm a scientist at heart, I need to know these things. As they're cleaning up their mess, Andy notices that Trigger looks huge, and Evan realizes that Trigger is almost doubled in size. Suddenly, Trigger is now the size of a pony, so he escapes easily out the fence and takes off running. Evan chases after him and realizes that Trigger is actually being helpful and tormenting the asshole twins. As he chases him, Trigger lets out a monster howl, and then Trigger's features begin to transform. His forehead burst forward and enlarged, his eyes grew wide and round before sinking under his protruding forehead. Fangs slid from his gaping mouth, and he uttered another howl into the sky, louder and more chilling than the first. "He's a monster," Evan cried. And then he woke up. That's right, we just had our very first It's Only a Dream sequence of the series. This one actually had me because we kind of seamlessly transitioned from a chapter cliffhanger about Trigger being twice as big right into a dream. I had just assumed Trigger had escaped right then and there. But then Stein pulls some shit. Evan realizes his bed doesn't feel right. It's too small. He lifts up the covers and he finds that his feet are enormous. He realizes he's monstrously enormous and begins to scream on a chapter cliffhanger, and then bam! A second surprise dream attack. In case you're still confused, don't worry. Stein clarifies what's happening. His screams woke him up. This time, he really woke up, and realized that the first time he had only dreamed that he was awake, and had only dreamed that he'd become a giant. Dreams upon dreams. Was he really awake now? After clearing up the dream stuff, Evan looks outside and sees Trigger, who is definitely bigger, but not monster-sized, and he decides to take him to the vet tomorrow, which is an excellent idea, Evan. But as he's going back to sleep, he notices that the monster blood is quivering and bubbling up to the top of the coffee can. He apparently just goes to sleep after seeing this, because we cut to a new chapter at the vet's office. Despite his lack of curiosity, Evan is still definitely a lot more proactive than some of our other protagonists so far. I also like that these two 12-year-olds just scheduled their own appointment at the vet. At this point, the vet agrees that it's just a growth spurt, but qualifies this bullshit with that it's highly unusual, and then he references some testing that should come back in 3 to 4 days. Otherwise, Trigger is completely healthy. It's revealed he's the size of a sheepdog now, but it's recommended that he cut down on his in-between meal snacks, so no more munching on monster blood for Trigger. Evan has to tie Trigger up outside the store, and when he returns he finds those stupid twins untying the dog. These twins deserve the worst. Trigger is a very good boy and turns the tables on the twins by baring his teeth and snapping at them. They take off running and Trigger goes after them, just like in Evan's dream, which causes him to wonder if Trigger will transform into a hellhound in an attempt at a cliffhanger. We again skip past some story and cut to Evan asking to visit Andy to help with some mysterious problem that isn't Trigger because it's revealed he already caught him during our chapter break. He sneaks out of the house carrying a bucket and arrives at Andy's. At this point, they're both staring at the bucket of monster blood, and they finally realize that Trigger must be growing because he ate some. They ponder over the various adults and authority figures that they could try to tell, and they decide on telling none of them because nobody will believe them, of course. It's not like they have physical evidence of growing monster blood or anything. Evan also doesn't want to toss the monster blood in the trash like Andy suggested, in case they needed to cure Trigger. So they settle on having Andy take half of it in a coffee can. The issue is, the monster blood then tries sucking the can in, and when Evan goes to retrieve it, he feels it sucking his hands in too. He's able to get the can out, but now he's apparently suspicious of the monster blood, but not so suspicious that it stops him from leaving a can full for Andy to deal with. So after this meeting, all they've accomplished is splitting the monster blood into even more monster blood. Great work, team. As Evan is leaving Andy's, the twins appear again, ready to cause more chaos as per usual. They really don't have much going on in their lives, considering they seem to spend their free time just following Evan everywhere. This time the twins give him an actual beatdown, punching him in the stomach and right below the eye. Evan lays on the ground, and when he comes to, Andy is standing by him. They realize that the monster blood is on the grass, and when they try to put it in the bucket, it doesn't want to pull apart. They end up lifting the entire glob into the bucket, and when he gets home, he realizes that the bucket is already full again. Aunt Catherine notices his black eye, and remarks that Chicken was always getting into fights with boys twice his size too. He considers telling his aunt about the monster blood, but he thinks she's too weird to be helpful, so he decides to stick with Andy's plan, which is to take it back to the toy store in the morning. At 10 p.m., the coast is clear to check on the monster blood, since he's worried it will outgrow the bucket. In the garage, he sees that it's once again quivering right up to the top of the bucket. I think the solution is clearly to stop giving it bigger containers, since it likes quivering right at the top so much. He takes the bucket inside and down to the basement, where we are treated to a great cobweb scene. Poor Evan gets himself tangled up in some super thick cobwebs, and if that's not bad enough, he feels spiders crawling all over his face, and surprisingly, these are not like fake-out spiders, they're actually spiders all over this kid. After surviving the spiders, he finds an old bathtub and decides that's as good a place as any for the monster blood and pours it on in. Once in the tub, the monster blood suddenly fills it halfway. So Evan, I am telling you, quit giving its face to spread. We get another cat-based chapter cliffhanger as Sarah Beth jumps on Evan's back and knocks him right into the tub. Sarah Beth is an assassin, because Evan really struggles in the monster blood, and we have a great sequence where he's pulling his face away from it, trying not to suffocate, only for him to just barely break free and attempt to pull himself out of the tub. It's well written, and you can kind of feel that Evan is really trying his hardest to get out of that monster blood, but can't. We get a tiny chapter cliffhanger where he's about to give up, but pushes through and gets himself out of the tub. As this is happening, Sarah Beth is watching, seemingly amused at Evan's suffering. This cat is clearly no good. We then cut to the next morning, and Evan is again suffering through some plain Wheaties, which Aunt Catherine encourages him to eat quickly because it's good roughage. Evan finally decides to tell his aunt and writes her a note stating that the basement tub is overflowing with monster blood and he can't stop it. His aunt starts cackling about what a prankster he is and comparing him to good old chicken once again. She suddenly grabs him by the earlobe and whispers, "I warned you. I warned you to be careful." He storms off upstairs, not really thinking about the two very different messages he just got from his aunt, and decides to call Andy. If he had put some thought into it, he could have seen that Aunt Catherine clearly knew something. The kids decide to meet to head to the toy store, Andy with her garbage sack of monster blood, and Evan with his garbage sack of monster blood. We conveniently skip past Evan getting it into the sack, because based off what we know so far, that wouldn't have been an easy task. Also, wouldn't it just absorb the sack? And oh yeah, has anybody checked on Trigger? How big is he now? These questions aside, after all that work, and when they get to the toy store, surprise, it's out of business. They head back to Aunt Catherine's and end up stuffing the monster blood into a metal garbage can that clamps shut. As they're sitting there wondering what to do next, suddenly Aunt Catherine appears and announces his mom's on the way to get him this afternoon. Evan is ecstatic, and Andy has to point out that he's leaving her with a massive problem here, but Evan doesn't care, nor does he pretend to. He runs to tell the dog the good news, but oh shit, Trigger is now the size of a pony. Good luck explaining that one to your mom, Evan. Trigger takes off out of the yard, and in a graceful attempt to catch the dog, Evan trips into the bike and right into the garbage can. It spills over and the monster blood sloshes out, stands itself up, and springs onto Evan. At this point, the monster blood is definitely more sentient and shapeshifty versus just ooze. I'm kind of picturing muck. Evan gets primal and lets out an animal cry as he dodges the monster blood. The monster blood throws itself at the garage wall and ricochets at them. The monster blood is way more active than I remember as a kid. I kind of just thought it was just like sloshing at them. The monster blood proceeds to bounce around the yard chasing them, at one point stopping to suck up a robin. The kids are screaming bloody murder, but no adults are appearing. But unfortunately, their cries of terror seem to summon the demon twins. They don't have much time to be their charming selves though, because the monster blood just runs them right over and sucks them into it, as their arms go limp and they cry out in pain. When I read this, I was like, good, I hope they stay dead. Aunt Catherine appears in the doorway of the house, and the monster blood decides to go after her. She runs back inside, the monster blood squeezes in. The kids find Aunt Catherine cornered in the living room where she shouts at them to save themselves for an interesting reason. I made this thing, now I must die for it. In these past 5 pages, the drama went from, let's carry monster blood around, and to holy shit, it's eating people, and Aunt Catherine's a witch. Evan starts shouting how she put a spell on the can of monster blood to scare him or possibly kill him, and Aunt Catherine starts shouting, no, she didn't, she did, while pointing at Andy. But actually, no, she's not pointing at Andy, she's pointing at the cat, Sarah Beth. This rightfully confuses Andy enough that he hasn't even fully realized that his aunt is lip reading since she's responding to his accusations. Suddenly, Sarah Beth starts transforming. A lot is happening right now. Apparently, Aunt Catherine has been under Sarah Beth's spell, and Aunt Catherine threatens to suicide into the monster blood to escape and end the spell. Sarah Beth seems unfazed though and remarks that she's just going to kill the kids anyways, whether old Kathy's alive or not. She starts commanding the monster blood to kill the 2 kids when suddenly a giant trigger appears and accidentally knocks Sarah Beth into the monster blood, which kills her pretty much instantly as she vanishes into it. Trigger and the monster blood start to shrink and sadly releases everything it's eaten so far, including the 2 twins who get up and run out the door horrified. Well, everything except Sarah Beth, because reasons. The mom appears and Aunt Catherine casually takes her into the kitchen for a chat, because now that Sarah Beth is dead, she can hear again. Apparently, the past 20 years, Aunt Catherine has been Sarah Beth's slave, and she made her deaf and stopped her from learning to read lips and use sign language as part of the spell. Sarah Beth made her put a curse on the monster blood to chase Evan off, so he couldn't discover her secret, which is like a very convoluted approach to scaring a kid off. This book ends very quickly. Like within 3 pages of Sarah Beth dying, we end the story with Andy asking Evan if she can have some of the leftover monster blood as a souvenir, except when they look at the ground where it was, it's now gone. And that's it. That's how the story ends. When looking at the TV episode, it's our first standalone episode in the sense that it's only 22 minutes, but technically it's a 2-parter. However, part 2 opens with a plane and has nothing to do with the first book, so I'm only focusing on part 1. I thought the episode was just okay. I think it would have benefited from being a proper 2-parter, like Welcome to Dead House or Stay Out of the Basement. They had to cut out some of the key book parts to keep the runtime. Most notably, we don't have the asshole twins, which means we don't get to watch them get eaten by monster blood, which I was looking forward to. The episode also made Aunt Catherine hard of hearing versus deaf, and had her weirdly be into conducting orchestra music in her living room, although that gave us this great sequence. Catherine rocks. Another change that's minor but fun is Trigger is no longer a Cocker Spaniel, and instead he's played by, I'm fairly certain the same dog from Welcome to Deadhouse. Maybe that's the only dog actor they could find in Toronto. That all being said, they really did manage to cram a lot into 22 minutes. I like that Evan remains an ass in the episode just like he is in the book, starting right off the bat saying that Aunt Catherine's cookies taste like cat litter, and immediately ignoring her request for him to stay out of the forbidden room. Although when we see these sugar cookies, I kind of get why he hates them because they really do look like they belong in a cat box. Aunt Catherine is played over the top, but she's well acted, which isn't surprising considering how long she's been acting. Speaking of acting, I also want to throw in that Evan grows up to be slaughtered by Jason in Freddy vs. Jason. What an honor. I like that the TV episode is not subtle about her being a witch, because in the forbidden room he immediately walks across something like pentagram-esque on the floor, looks at spell books and jars of gross shit. Another big change is instead of venturing into the creepy old toy store, they find the monster blood in a jar in the forbidden room, open it, and then summon a cat that both the kids somehow miss. They also never question why this new cat is stalking them and growling at them through the rest of the episode. The monster blood looks really cool in the episode. I kind of remembered it being more CGI, but by and large they used practical effects, and I think the texture looks pretty awesome. It's also impressive that they made literal buckets of it. I really wanted to jump in that tub that they knock Evan into. The TV monster blood is extra bouncy, and it launches into the sky, and while the kids are distracted, it helps itself to a little snack that would make Renfield proud. I also enjoyed that we get to see Trigger do some A+ dog acting after he eats the monster blood, and when we get to see his gigantic footprints, which are hilarious. They make Evan commit to his role and have him running around in slime for half the episode. We also get this really weird shot of Sarah Beth on the banister. Why couldn't we just get a real shot of the cat on the banister before the transformation? Sarah Beth in human form is a delight and truly gives it her all as a Catwoman. Look at all this cat behavior on display. She was also ahead of the trend with these claw nails, and her outfit was ready for the craft. Step aside, Nancy. Sarah Beth's monster origin story is a bit odd. Sarah Beth isn't just trapped in a jar of monster blood, she's a cat trapped in a jar of monster blood. Also, she supposedly got eaten by a handful of monster blood somehow, and then placed in the jar. So how did Evan and Andy spend half the episode playing with handfuls of it without issue? The logic kind of really just goes out the window in the episode. Once Trigger knocks Sarah Beth into the monster blood, the episode kind of just ends suddenly and they're on a plane, so I'm assuming that's where part 2 is going to be taking place. Overall, I enjoyed the book more than the episode, largely in part due to the slaughter of the twins, but the episode isn't a total loss. Aunt Catherine is great, and we get a lot of fun shots of the monster blood in action. If I were to rate the book, I would give it 4 out of 5 kitty litter sugar cookies. Alright, let's jump into our Goosebumps totals. Right off the bat, we don't have any It's a Prank Bros, but we do have our first additions to It's Only a Dream. Monster Blood treated us to not just one, but 2 back-to-back dream fake-outs. The first was a well-executed transition from a monster dog nightmare. The second was a bit silly, with Evan waking up from a dream in a dream. Monster Blood also gave us our first asshole victims, and it couldn't have happened to a more deserving pair. I'm of course referring to the twins, who spent their free time beating up our protagonists, putting his dog in danger, and most egregiously, tying that poor cat to a tree trunk. Thankfully, the Monster Blood took care of them, and it was a fairly painful way to go. But sadly, of course, they ended up coming back, so... Getting jiggy with the 90s did well in this book, giving us 8 90s moments. These included the phrase, "Excuse me," Nintendo, an oversized t-shirt down to the knees, VCRs, Nintendo games, baggy shorts, Indiana Jones, and a phone credit card. This brings our series total to 23 jiggy 90 moments. Alright, back to vomit count. Surprise, once again, there's no vomit. There's really not much to say here other than I regret nothing. We had one shoulder scare in Monster Blood. When Andy first meets Evan, she gives him a startle by grabbing him on the shoulder in a chapter cliffhanger setup, which brings our series total to 6 shoulder scares. We had our biggest total of chapter cliffhangers so far with 19 cliffhangers in Monster Blood, raising our Goosebumps total to 42. Monster Blood had some well-written chapter cliffhangers, but I thought the clunky cliffhanger award goes to chapters 3 to 4, where Evan morphs Take Care of the Dog into his own weird murder fantasy when she's clearly just taking the dog outside. Shocker ending. Our very sudden ending of the Monster Blood not being on the carpet anymore read more like a cliffhanger than any sort of fun twist like we've seen in our previous 2 stories, so I'm just going to go ahead and ignore this one as a shocker ending. Is that controversial? I don't know. Well, that's it for the 3rd book in our series. I've heard that some people really don't like Evan as a protagonist, but I kind of enjoyed what a little shit he was throughout the story. I think it made it more interesting. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed my various blob monsters, shapeshifters, and evil cats. Be sure to let me know what you thought of Monster Blood in the comments. Would you take a bite out of some Monster Blood? Also, let me know what you think of the Monster Blood sequels. I don't really know what to expect for those, but I don't really have high hopes. Anyways, thanks again for watching, and make sure you subscribe for...
the pride, the love.